Auspicious greetings, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We're having some tech issues, but it's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for being here for our Thank Buddha It's Friday program. It is our great honor to have Professor Sandra Wawrytko to share with us today on the topic of experiential wisdom of just this, Basho's haiku composition viewed through neuroscience.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank the Tifan Temple and everyone involved with it to invite me to come here to talk about a topic I very interested in. And I want to share with you what you think about this process that I have used with students that you'll see for more than 10 years now. Oh.
All right, we'll try this again. We were talking, but we were muted. Again, I want to thank Shifang Temple and everyone involved with it for the invitation to come and talk about this topic. And I hope we have some interesting discussion afterwards, because I think it's an area that has not been explored as much as it possibly could. And as someone who's been teaching Buddhism for decades, I've always been very interested in being able to communicate to students, even at an entry level. And I found this particular use of Basho's haiku composition to be extremely helpful to many of them. And I have some student comments about it, as we'll see as we go along. Oops, go too fast here. Okay. So the problem of perception is one of the most important things that we need to talk about when we discuss Buddhism. People have a lot of perceptions. The term in Sanskrit is lakshana, and there's a very important quote that I use quite often from Master Xing Yun, and this is from his work, which is a translation of the Diamond Sutra. So the word lakshana in Buddhism refers to deluded awareness. Lakshana may be thought of as the building blocks of delusion. They can be thoughts, perceptions, memories, dreams, emotions, or any other element of awareness. And so that's what is going to be, in a sense, targeted when we talk about this Basho haiku composition process. So these perceptions, which are part of our internal mentation, this is where the neuroscience aspect comes in. These are the things that tend to prevent us from seeing reality as it is. And this seems to be something the Buddha was very much aware of. So this is a very well-known comment on the part of the Buddha, someone who wanted to find an express way to awakening, ask for advice, and this is what the Buddha finally came up with. In your seeing, there should be only seeing. In your hearing, nothing but hearing. In your smelling, tasting, touching, nothing but smelling, tasting, touching. In your cognizing, nothing but cognizing. And then a more contemporary commentary here. When contact occurs through any of the six bases of sensory experience, there should be no valuation, no conditioned perception. Once perception starts evaluating any experience as good or bad, one sees the world in a distorted way because of one's own old blind reactions. In order to free the mind from all conditioning, we must learn to stop evaluating on the basis of past reactions and to be aware without evaluating and without reacting. And that is the just seeing what's taking place right in front of you. So this is a very interesting technique that was used by Master Shangyan, who also had a temple in Taiwan, as well as other places. New York State was the other place he had one. And he would call this his basic training for the beginning practitioner to try to purify eye consciousness. Sometimes I ask people to look at things or at people sitting across from them. I ask them to look attentively, but to refrain from identifying or categorizing the object. For example, in observing people, a practitioner tries not to perceive an individual as male or female, stranger or friend. To do this, one must refrain from using one's memory, ideas, or any previous experience. Like a camera, one must look without discrimination. If one has been practicing well, it is possible to see things in this different way. And again, this is what the haiku composition process trains you to do, even if you just start in a minimal way. So there are several questions that I'm going to be exploring here. So what is mindfulness or meditation from a Buddhist perspective? Sometimes those words are used interchangeably and sometimes they are unique. How does the shift from being asleep to being awake take place? How can it be understood within the context of neuroscience? How can a poem reveal awakening? And can the poetic composition process be a meditational practice or a means to epistemological awakening? So this doesn't necessarily mean by writing haiku you become awakened. That's why I call it epistemological. You have a sense or an intellectual wisdom about the process, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've gotten to experiential wisdom. But it gives you that uh, a peek in the rice paper. Mhm.
Can you say that again?
Starting with
I never heard the word
oh, epistemological awakening. Yes. So this is when you have an intellectual understanding of what is awakening, but you haven't experienced the awakening. So in Buddhism, they make a distinction between intellectual wisdom, but beyond that is the experiential wisdom. And you can use poetry, including haiku poetry, uh, to, let's say, convey your awakening experience. But just because you write haiku doesn't make you enlightened necessarily. So first, the mindfulness or meditation from a Buddhist perspective. So asleep versus awake. I think those two images are very helpful here. The asleep mind is egocentric. It's a discriminating mind. It adheres to dualism, uh, engages in competition, and also experiences dukkha, thinking about life as a zero-sum game. There's winners and there's losers. And here we find the three poisons, the aversion, the attraction, and the ignorance. So those are the key elements that the Buddha concentrated on, that these are what need to be eliminated in order to eliminate the dukkha. These are the causes. The awakened mind is allocentric, doesn't put itself in the center of things because there is no self. There's the realization of that. So this provides interconnectedness, receptivity, being open to the notion of impermanence, and to empty out thought coverings, all these ideas and concepts that prevent us from seeing things as they really are. So awareness leads to wisdom. And it's the awareness that I think the haiku composition can help us with, particularly students who are new to Buddhism. And instead of the three poisons, we can enjoy the four exalted dwellings. So these uplifting emotions, empathy for others, sense of compassion, shared joy, and equanimity. So, how can the shift from being asleep to being awake be understood by neuroscientists? There actually are several scientists who are working in this area who also happen to be practicing Buddhists. And so they've been very helpful in guiding us to the connection between these. This doesn't mean that neuroscience has invented Buddhism, but as one of the books put it, neuroscientists are beginning to realize what Buddhists have known for a long time. They've been there first. So, in a very simple way, we've got our bilateral brain, and there's the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is the one that is task driven, has a very narrow egocentric focus, and this is where the discriminating mind comes from. This is called dorsal attention. So neuroscientists have these phrases. On the right hemisphere, which we don't tend to pay as much attention to, we have stimulus driven attention, expansive allocentric focus, and looking at the overall context rather than one specific task. So that's the ventral attention. And I like to talk about the hybrid brain, probably because I've driven at least two different hybrid cars. There's one parked outside there. And this is fully functional non-dualism. So it's not that it's necessarily the case that we want to get rid of the left hemisphere, but it has become domineering. It wants to be dominant and therefore closes us off to many of the qualities that are associated with the right hemisphere. So there are certain tools that have been identified in this left brain, and it's called the left brain interpreter. And self is really the product of the left brain interpreter. It begins to see itself as distinct from all other beings, the self versus other notion. And it likes to categorize things, it likes to make judgments, and it also creates belief systems. And it is found to be the case that language is mostly focused on the left brain. But on the right brain, we have something that the neuroscientists call a circuit breaker. So when the left brain interpreter is going too far, when the self is going too far, it tries to stop that kind of excessive behavior. And so this seems to fit in very nicely with Buddhism, which has a non-discriminating mind, doesn't make the categorizations, is non-judgmental, and also is able to have non-belief, that is not taking sides, that either you're a believer or you're a disbeliever, and we have continual dualistic conflict there. And the right brain is focused on image. And this is where poetry becomes a bridge between the left and the right. They can work together, something they can appreciate both. And so I've been using this technique of haiku composition in more than 10 classes at San Diego State, beginning in 2009. And I've also taught it in two classes at Fo Guangshan's English Buddhist College. And in that group, we had international students as well as monks and nuns. And so these are some of the classes that I use it in: empirical perspectives of Buddhism. I wanted to call it science of Buddhism, but the science college wouldn't let me do that. So we had to call it this. I had a very interesting class on the mindful brain for at the 100 level. So there were a lot of beginning students. Asian models of leadership. It might seem a strange place to teach people how to do a haiku composition, but leaders can still benefit from these kinds of practices. Most often, I've used it in my global aesthetics class that some people know about in this room. And the earliest class I used was philosophy and literature, where we talked about philosopher poets in Asia. So, in what sense can a poem reveal awakening? And can the poetic composition process be a means to this epistemological awakening? Are you able to go out of your left brain mind? Because that's where the problems start, because that's where the self is. So Basho was a very interesting person. He was not officially a meditation teacher. He was not a monk, although he sometimes wore monk's clothing, and he was a practitioner of Zen. And he not only created this very unique form of haiku composition, but he wrote quite a bit about the philosophy behind it. For example, he says the secret of poetry lies in treading the middle path between the reality and the vacuity of the world. So seeing both the samsara side and the nirvana side. And when he talked about himself, he had this same sense of in-betweenness. So he liked to go around in a black robe, and he called himself a bat that passes for a bird at one time and a mouse at another. So going in between, so we could see that as going in between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, that hybrid approach. He was also a great fan of Chinese poetry. And in fact, when someone wanted to know the shortcut of becoming a haiku poet, he said, read Chinese poetry. Chinese poetry, of course, has been around for quite a long time, and they have used many of the same kinds of tools that are applied in haiku composition. But as we'll see, he had his own unique way of doing his haiku. But there are two characters in Chinese that are part of this poetic approach. So one is comparison, and the other one is association. So in Chinese, these are the bi and the xing. So comparing two things, two objects. So very often in the poetry of the haiku, there is something about the physical world that we are seeing, that we're experiencing directly, and how that also relates to that notion of acuity that Basho talked about. It's the so-called real world of materialism, but at the same time, there's the other way of looking at reality. There's the narrow view, and then there's the full view. So putting those things next to each other to evoke some kind of response. And then there's also association. This character actually shows the enthusiastic gesture of hands uplifted. And so this is provoking. So reading haiku poetry is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. There's very few words, and there's quite a bit that we have to bring to the reading of that poetry. And so these are cross-cultural literary techniques in which Basho is emulating Chinese poetry, but also in a way making his own form, which is the haiku. So one way to talk about the bi and the xing together, to generate, alleviate, express, or transmit one's feelings and ideas through reference to external scenes or objects. So the inner world and the outer world are brought together. And then the juxtapositioning, incongruous elements brought together into close contact. And we'll see some examples of that, while connoting conflict, abruptness of placement, or surprise at contrasts. So you really have to think for yourself when you're listening to the poetry. So one of the comments from a Chinese source, this notes on poetry, not a single line is expressed plainly. And that's intentional because you don't want to just give a message. You want to provoke a response. Basho's comment is that a haiku revealing 70 to 80% of the subject is good, yet those revealing 50 to 60% will never bore us. So you want to engage the reader. You don't want to make it too easy for them. So Basho also tells us only by stepping aside, by relinquishing the importance of being the author, can one capture and transmit the essence, the very isness of a thing. So here, what we see in his form of haiku, you have to get out of the way. The poet shouldn't be seen in that poem. Now, that's very difficult for people. And if you could do it in a poem, then maybe you can expand that into other areas of your life. Again, advice to his students, make the universe your companion, always bearing in mind the true nature of things, mountains and rivers, trees and grasses, and humanity. Notice the humanity comes last. And enjoy the falling blossoms and the scattering leaves. So most of his time he spent on the road, the back roads of Japan. Sometimes he had a companion with him, but he was most happy when he was out in nature itself, all seasons of the year. So the experiential wisdom that he is looking for is found, I think, very much in this quote. Don't follow in the footsteps of the old poets, specifically the Chinese poets. Seek what they sought. So he doesn't want to be just their students. He wants to find what they found in their own use of that juxtapositioning technique. So this is the connection we find with Buddhist philosophy itself. This is from a Theravada Sutta, and it's explained by Gonika. The physical aspect of Vedana or sensations is particularly important because it offers vivid, tangible experience of the reality of impermanence within ourselves. So many of the poems of Basho and his students reveal that impermanence in a multitude of ways. We react not to exterior reality, but to the sensations within us. Again, that merging of the inner and the outer. Therefore, observation of Vedana is essential in order to practice what the Buddha taught. And this is the beginning of the composition of a haiku. You have to be aware of the sensations and not overthink what those sensations are about. And that's why he champions the what he calls on-the-spot composition. Now, many people don't realize he edited his poetry afterwards, but he did want to have that spontaneous expression and then polish it up later on. So composition must occur in an instant, like a woodcutter felling a huge tree or a swordsman leaping at his enemy. Our friend Basho was actually a member of the samurai class, although he himself never followed that lifestyle, but he came from a samurai family. It is also like cutting a ripe watermelon with a sharp knife or like taking a large bite at a pear. So you have to be very active and very focused. So there are 17 lines in haiku, 5, 7, and 5. Those are the the syllables that you use. When they do the translations from Japanese into English, often you lose the 5, 7, 5. So when I'm teaching the students, I tell them try to keep as close as possible, but it's all right. Even Basho sometimes gets the numbers slightly off. So the first line is about cultivating awareness. You focus on the outer situation so you can illuminate the inner condition. So what's going on out there is resonating with what's going on within yourself. So right where you are is reality. Could be in the middle of a mud puddle. You could be anywhere, but there is reality in that moment. You have to get rid of all the cultural sedimentation, temporal distinctions, past, future, or present, and just be at that moment. So that goes back to the original quote from the Buddha, seeing and only seeing. The second line, in many ways, is the most difficult because you have to make a quick, what they call break. This is known as the cutting word, a breakthrough to a fresh, unmediated, unexpected perspective. So you're looking at something very mundane, and yet there's something about it that is very unique and connects with reality as it is. So this summons the reader to be an active performer and interpreter to create and complete the work. So when you see that cutting word, it very often seems to be contradictory. First, he's talking about one thing and then something completely different. And you have to try to figure out what is the connection between those two things. The last line should bring about insight, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, even for Basho. So this arises from the juxtaposition of seemingly distinct objects or events to reveal the non-dualism of the non-discriminating mind. So this is where you've gotten in touch with your right hemisphere at this particular point. So melding particular and universal, universal and particular, emptiness and wondrous being, compassionate interpenetration. So this is a contemporary um, commentator, Japanese commentator, on what he calls the haikai imagination. Haikai is the plural of haiku, but very rarely can I get my students to use that word. They call it haikus. So this is how you access the right brain through that stimulus-driven attention. You defamiliarize. Anything that is familiar should be left out. Don't approach the topic or the object the way everyone else has done. You have to have a unique perspective. Dislocating habitual, conventionalized perceptions. So it has to be very, very fresh. Recontextualization. So try to find a way to bring things that don't seem to go together together. And that's usually where the break comes in. And so the recontextualization can lead us to a refamiliarization. Constantly search for newness, hence the ability to interact in playful, lively dialogue. And very often it's quite humorous. There's a lot of humor in Basho. So here is one of my favorite poems from him. This is pre-awakening. So we can look at his poetry before and after, and we could also take a look at his Enlightenment poem. Winter downpour, even the monkey needs a raincoat. So he's out there in the winter during a downpour, and he's walking along the road. And of course, that's not a very comfortable way to be. So he has that shift. First, he's probably feeling very sorry for himself, very uncomfortable, but then he thinks about the monkey. So that is a shift. That is a crucial cutting away from what he experiences to realizing there are monkeys out there who don't even have a raincoat that he has. And that therefore they need the raincoat. So the initial awareness becomes part of this stopping of that left brain interpreter just thinking about itself again. And then that clear observation of what connects him with the monkey. They're both wet. They're both cold. They're both unhappy. And therefore, he feels not just empathy, but also compassion. So there's impermanence, there's non self, and then there's the fullness of emptiness. Those are the kinds of things he tries to convey. So I give my students a haiku checklist. Try to find empathy and take themselves out of the poem, as we saw. Try to stick as much as possible to the 575 template. Have some kind of a flow where what seems to be unlike elements somehow can be seen together. So that's the juxtapositioning. And to go on and have compassion. That's one of the things I like about the monkey poem, because he has compassion for the chill that he's experiencing along with the monkey. And then the last one is the most difficult. Has the poet disappeared from the poem? Have they been able to transcend the self, the interpreter? So here's another one of his poems. Now, he also did paintings. They're called the Haiku. And so if you take a look at this picture, it's not telling the whole story. So his images usually are about the initial sensation. So again, he's walking along the road, there beside the road, a hibiscus. And that's what he shows us in this painting. But what is the poem really about? The horse that has chewed it all up. So occasionally he had a horse with him, and I suspect that what happened is he's walking along, he sees this beautiful flower, and as he's enjoying it, the horse decides it's better off if I eat it, and it's gone. So he has the moment of the beauty of the flower, but then he begins to realize he's not the only one there. He's not the only one who is enjoying the sensory object in completely different ways. Now, this is his awakening poem. And this is the picture that he made alongside of it. There's been endless discussion of this particular poem. The poem is actually written right there. Into the ancient pond, a frog jumps. Literally, it says water's sound. Usually it's translated as the sound of water. Now, what makes this very unique and really impressed all of his students, all of the frog poetry at that time was about the singing of a frog. Nobody wrote a poem about the sound of a frog jumping into a pond. But that's exactly what he experienced. He's walking along, he's hearing the sound of water, and he begins to realize, well, where's that sound coming from? Because the frog jumped. But it's not just about a frog. And what is that final line? Well, this is one of the commentaries. The sound of the frog, not as an image of the universe, but as the universe, as Basho, as each one of us who hears it in the moment of hearing, because there can be nothing else. So this seems to indicate that his awakening comes from his following the advice of the Buddha. In hearing, there's only hearing. There's no interpretation, there's no self, there's no other. There's just that sound. And that seems to be what awakened him. And I have two very interesting sources here talking about the proper way to try to convey meaning. One is a Chinese philosopher, the other is a physicist. You might have heard of Richard Feynman. Yeah. So Li Ho says, direct statement too easily turns into pure conceptual knowledge. You're going to go back to the left brain, and you're not really getting in touch with the non-dualism of reality. So the direct statement, the meaning stops when the words do. The exclamation, ah, how sad I am, is only a concept, not poetry. So this is not necessarily something we find in English language poetry, but this is very much what we find in Chinese poetry and also in Japanese poetry. You shouldn't give away too much. Remember that 50 or 60% that Basho said would be appropriate. And then there's Richard Feynman. The real problem in speech is not precise language. It is really quite impossible to say anything with absolute precision, unless that thing is so abstracted from the real world as to not represent any real thing. Abstraction is what the left hemisphere does. It loves abstraction. It disconnects itself from the material reality of the world. It detaches itself, which is very different from the Buddhist notion of non-attachment. You don't want to be attached to physical things, but you don't want to be detached because that would be a denial of non-dualism. So there's a saying, Chinese saying, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And I think this is what inspired me to teach my students how to do haiku because they could hear about it, they could talk about it, but unless they try to do it themselves, they wouldn't have the same experience. So we do several things. I have the students on their own try to create their haiku, but the assignment that seems to be the most important to them, and we'll see their comments, is what is developed by Basho himself. It's called on the spot linked composition. That means one person goes up and starts the link and writes a poem. The next person has to come up and have something that goes back, refers back to the prior poem, and then each successive poem has to have one link in that chain. So by the time you get to the end, um, it could be completely different from where it started. And you have to do it immediately. So uh, at first, I had them write it on the board, and now they just come up to the computer and type it in. But I also allow them to help each other so they can get some hints from the audience if they're having difficulty putting their poem together. And then at the end of the semester, they have to select one of their best haiku and talk about how they wrote it. What was their reflection? So these are the comments. So Brendan says, by doing the linked verse and writing my own haiku or listening to others, I learned the true beauty that can come out of mundane experiences. Many of the occurrences that people chose and that of what I chose were very common or mundane. However, we were able to look deeper and expose the deeper meaning and the lesson of these occurrences, as well as to connect on an emotional level with the nature of such occurrences. I also learned just how related many of our experiences were, and that the mundane experiences that we had are not our own. They all shared their experiences that many of us have experienced and can relate to. This shared experience helps us to explore and learn from different people's interpretations of the same shared experiences and how they find meaning within them. And this is the haiku that he contributed to our linked verse. Walking pace has slowed, approaching the place of awe where singing echoes. It's not Basho, but it's a good attempt, right? Andrew was in that same linked verse composition, and he's actually responding to Brendan's poem. When observing the haikus, one that I enjoyed the most was the one about walking in nature, the pace slowing and stopping to enjoy the awe. I think I like this one the most because it influenced my poem. I'm sitting there hoping that the keyboard doesn't go cold, waiting for the next person. Because of this poem, I was able to produce the poem I presented in class. So apparently, they sit there in the classroom and they're trying to compose their poem, but if they don't come up next to the keyboard, then they have to start all over again because it's already changed. So that's why he was a little worried. I think this interactive group composition was really helpful to experience. Without the influence of one of my peers, it may have taken me way longer to come up with something. Still, I also couldn't rely only on my peers, as it was also my responsibility to incorporate the experiences that made my poem unique. It wouldn't be effective to state the same thing that the person before me already stated. By the end of the session, I kind of felt this connection between my peers. I'm not sure how to explain it, but after undergoing this experience with my peers, we're all open to our errors and we were able to talk to one another and to fix those errors. Overall, this experience was very helpful. And this was from the 100 level class. None of these students were philosophy majors. They were just, it was a GE class, and it was something they all took because they needed it to graduate. And this is the haiku that Andrew wrote. Low and slow, no rush. Sun shines on polished surface. Engine roar brings awe. So he picked up on the notion of awe there. This is another class, reading our class text, going around trying to see clearly. Again, that's from the um, Buddha's comment. Writing and editing the poem and eventually writing this paper itself and reflecting on the haiku, I have been having numerous little aha experiences and will certainly continue to write and practice haiku. And I have no doubt that I will continue to gain a more complete idea of the universe and myself in the process. And finally, we have Jeff, who's a graduate student in philosophy. Haiku is truly divine language art. I recommend a philosophy class on haiku alone with Haiku Mania once a week. Thank you. They're not going to let me teach that class. No way, no way. But that's what he came up with. So I think we've got some time for questions. I'd like to leave plenty of time for questions and comments. Anyone? Yeah.
I was just thinking about that slide that shows
Mm.
and kind of I don't know, this reminded me of like the style was more like English oriented.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm closer to it, more close to language. Part of that. So I think maybe going back to the right brain, kind of getting that sound like this or something.
Yes, and what they found through studies of children, the first 6 months basically were only working with the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere develops much more slowly. And so that's when children are very stimulus driven. And that's why they go out and they start touching everything and they're likely to put their hand in the fire because they don't know what fire is about. That's how they begin to build up their knowledge of reality. And then around 6 months, the education process starts going towards the left brain interpreter. When language begins to develop, and also the notion of self begins to develop, because it's not there from the very beginning, as far as we can tell, which is, of course, exactly what the Buddha said.
So language, so you have to like
Language was one of the tools of the left brain. Yes.
I want to pick up on that because I look at the Chinese characters that you have up there, and I see a lot of imagery that's not present in Western language. And I think I read somewhere that there's 28,000 Chinese characters or whatever. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but many thousands, more so than what's help with that.
Mm-hmm.
And
About 50,000.
how much?
50,000
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
number I had heard.
What I'm trying to get at, it's visual, it's graphic, it really denotes something that is right brain. And then for one thing, it's like it would really translate that into English. But the other thing is, if you're Chinese and raised with that kind of background and that ability to see all this, they might have a better grasp of letting go of getting rid of delusion, because of their language
Yes.
than we do.
Yes, there are definitely some similarities among Indo-European languages, of which Sanskrit is one of them, which has a very important impact on how a philosophy develops. And I think it has a lot to do with how much of the right brain is being valued. We tend to devalue what's going on because there's no language there, and we put such a high priority on language
Yeah.
versus
And it
the
gets you away
image.
from the conceptual side and more into the visual thinking side.
That's right.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, you can use both of them, and that's the ideal way to make it work.
Okay. Thank you.
Comments, questions? Mhm. I think she was first, then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said. This was kind of related, but do you think that's why? Uh, I was just wondering,
Not like a very super related question, but just based off of what Denny said, do you think that's why people enjoy like art? Because it's like the imagery and it kind of activates the right brain
Yes.
and
Yes.
calms down the left brain. So it's like a calming experience and kind
And
of,
And
that's why
that's
I
why I
think
think
poetry is
poetry is so important because
both
both
sides of
sides
the
of the
brain
brain
can
can
be
be
part of
part
it.
of that because
Does
it does
involve
involve
language,
language,
but you
but you
also
also
need the
need the
imagery.
imagery.
So
So I
sometimes
sometimes
get the
get the
sense
sense
that
that
the
the
use of the
use of the
haiku
haiku
is
is
kind of
kind of
bringing
bringing
along
along
the
the
left
left
brain saying, oh,
saying, oh,
we'll work together
they're
on
on
this.
this.
And the
The
next thing
next
you
thing
know, the right
we
brain is at line
find
number three.
three,
We've
and we
got a left behind
the interpreter
there's
because
there's no self.
that's
Entirely.
ideal left in that poem.
yeah. And then I was also wondering, is left brain and right brain like physically the left side of the brain and physically the right side of the brain?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
And
And
I
we
also
also
should
should
point
point
out
out
that this
that this
bilateral
bilateral
brain is
brain is
not
not
unique to human beings. Other species also have
to
it.
have it.
Hmm. Thank you.
That's not the question you had.
Uh, where is the frontal lobe in this?
Parts of the frontal lobe can interact with the left and with the
With
right.
the right.
So
So
there are
there are
areas where
areas
the two sides
sides
kind of cross
cross
over.
over.
So the things that we've been talking
Talking
about
about
is
is the
lateralization.
latterization. So language is
Lateralized, they
latterized,
say
they
on the
say, on the
left.
left brain.
And the reason that they
Know
this
this is
because
because they've done what they call the
split
split
brain
brain
uh,
uh,
studies. Sometimes people, for whatever reason, there's a disconnect
connect
between the
between
left
the
and the
left and the
right,
right,
and then
and
they
then they
can
can
talk to people and get responses from them. And they've learned a lot of
what happens with the two sides, and they'll tell two completely different stories about what's right in front of them. There was another, yeah.
Maybe something connected to the question about art. Mine was about language because there was a slide that talked about left brain and right brain. And I think I'm confusing two things here, but left, it said like language, and right, it said image.
That's right.
And my first thought was, oh, I thought, people that speak or study languages, like maybe that they have a more pronounced right brain, or I don't know. I came up like maybe it's like the old like kind of humanities right brain, math science left brain. This is kind of what I grew up
Hmm.
conditioned to think.
Hmm.
And so I was just wondering how that kind of reconciles with the slide I saw. And they might be two different concepts, right? Like that was kind of maybe how we learn or how things resonate with us. Left brain language, right brain image. So it might be that I'm kind of this is like apples and oranges, But I was thinking about that, about how the right brain, I don't know, people would say like, oh, you must be right brain. You like languages and stuff, and you have an aptitude, but that might be just to hold another ball of wax. You know what I mean? Like right brain, left brain, the attributes and like language and different languages, foreign languages. I always thought that was like a right brain versus left brain was more, like I said, the math and science. So I mean, this might be something that people made up around me when I was growing up. I don't know. But I mean, these are things that I heard. And so this is a very interesting, different kind of lens through which I'm seeing these concept of what I understand to be left brain and right brain, which is why I appreciated the question. Are we literally talking about literally the left brain and the right brain? And then how those kind of wax and wane and work together?
Yeah,
there's
there's
still
still
quite a bit
quite a
we
bit we
don't know
don't know
about it,
about
but
it, but
it
it
seems
seems,
based on
based on what the research has shown, is that there are many ways in which the two sides cooperate with one another, but there are also, as I mentioned, the way in which we have the circuit breaker. This is the language that neuroscientists use, that the right brain will step in and stop the left brain if it's going too far. The problem that the right brain has is they call distractibility. It's just going off in all different directions. So the left brain is able to be more narrowly focused, which can be very helpful for certain tasks. Very differently from that, we have the right brain, which is more about the context and looking at the broad overview. So I'm really curious about where the left and the right uh, language that you talked about came from, because this is fairly recent in terms of the development of neuroscience. So that and there might have been a period of time where people were not, yet at the point, such as the split brain studies. Those were done maybe about 40 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to ask about I teach art, motivational art. It's not theory, it's not anything I learned in school. And a fun exercise to get the people motivated, I tell them just cover your right eye. That's the left brain. And paint, I don't know, happy face, super basic, or a tree, And because that left eye is corresponding with the right, the brain, the creative side, feminine side, and the opposite. If you want to see how the same sentence or the same tree is drawn, cover your left eye, when the logical brain will just do the perfect tree in the box. So, I mean, that tells you, or tells me where they're at with their creativity. And sometimes I put a patch on the right eye on some of them, because they don't get out of that logical tree, goes in the box and has to be green grass and has to be blue sky. No, cover that right eye and paint the portrait.
Yeah, I believe there were some books written about that decades ago. Yeah, I think it's called Drawing with the Left Brain. Are you familiar with that? Yes, yes. And the woman who wrote it, as I understand it, her son continued on and still teaches that sort of technique.
Interesting. So that was
That was
probably
very,
very
very
early on when they were
when they were
beginning to
to
explore it.
and
It
it
certainly
certainly
became
became
very
very
obvious that there's
there's
something
something
going
going
on.
on.
My problem
Problem
is
is
that
that my this eye doesn't really work. So what am I going to do?
Well, then it tells you where you're at in life. Tells you what dominates your actions. If you find it difficult to see through the light, which is so that it's one problem with learning. Yeah.
So this one works fine, and this one.
I just got to realize that both eyes.
Sorry, yeah. I had a question, comment. As I was listening to your explanation, I was thinking this last year I was at the VA working with veterans there, and I facilitated some of the groups, and I also did one-to-one patient care as a chaplain, and it made me think about haikus as a potential healing activity for people with PTSD or just some sort of trauma. So I was just curious if you've ever heard it being used in a therapeutic way, because the way you described it, it resonated with me as a therapeutic tool. So I was just curious if your thoughts on that.
The first thing that comes to my mind is Basho himself. He
Actually
really
started
started
to
to
practice Buddhism after the death of a very
very
good friend of his.
as
There was a whole series of events. His
his
friend had
friend had
died,
died,
his
then his
mother
mother,
died,
and then
his
his
house
house
was burned down. And that's when he started taking to the road
wrote
and writing his haiku. So I think it was very therapeutic
for
for him.
him.
And it was
It was a
quite a process
process
until he got to the
to the
frog
frog
poem.
poem,
Yeah,
awakening moment.
Thank you.
You were first.
I can just.
Fine. So my question is, you there was a quote from Basho that said that the secret of poetry is to tread between vacuity and reality. I think there was more to the quote, but that was kind of the point.
Mm.
Makes me think, isn't that the same with isn't it the same with mindfulness? Like meditating?
Yes, I
I
think that
think that
what he's doing with his haiku is, I want
I
to
don't
say it is meditation, but it is a
like
reflection of some of the
the
maybe cognitive
cognitive
processes that
processes that
are
are
going
going
on
on.
in meditation.
There
There does seem to be
to be
some
some
connection
connection
there.
there between them.
So he wasn't, as I
They
said,
said he didn't
come
come
across as a
across as a
meditation
meditation
teacher.
teacher, and
He knew poetry, and that's what he taught his students. But he didn't teach it as a literary experience.
experience.
He saw it as a form of Buddhism.
Uh, okay. I was wondering, kind of similar to what she was saying, when you were saying how like the the left brain can get really like hyper focused and specific and something like, and then like you're saying the right brain kind of like jumps in to stop it. I think you said that they didn't really like they don't know as much how that jumping in part works. But could you just like elaborate more on what you meant by that? Like, just
It,
I'm
it,
thinking of it as a, like in a mental health context, where like if someone has like an intense anxiety attack, I'm assuming like their left brain is really involved because it's very hyper focused, very like zoomed in on that one instant or one feeling. Whereas if the right brain could jump in and give it a little more of like a whole image of what's going on and
mhm.
more of like a broader sense of what's going on, maybe it would calm someone down. But how to like activate that jumping in? You know what I'm
I'm not
saying?
so sure that they have understood how
Oh,
that happens and how they can make it happen. Uh,
And
and
like
it's
a
like a
rebalancing,
rebalancing
yeah.
between
from one extreme to
the
the other
other
extreme.
extreme.
And
And
that
that
might be
might
the
be the
area
area
they
that they
can
can
kind of
kind of
tell when
tell
it's
when it's happening.
happening. You know, they
They
put
put the
wires
wires
on
on
the
the
brain
brain.
to
They
see
can see what
which parts of it
parts of it
are
are
lighting
lighting
up.
up,
But I
but I
don't
don't
think
think
they have
they have
a
a
full
full
understanding
understanding
of
of how this
how
how
it really
really
works.
works.
Okay. Thank you.
Just want to make sure on Zoom no one has any last questions
I have a
or
question.
question maybe where
You Chow,
Question slide 24.
can I go? Oh, sorry.
This is 24. 24.
Yeah.
Now, the most important one
Maybe,
here is at the end with this notion of newness.
yeah, maybe a comment. This seems like the process of like learning, education.
I
I
think
think
there are
there are certain
certain models of
models that we
education that unfortunately
usually
don't
don't
go
go.
this way.
Right.
They just
This
want
is
to
they
indoctrinate.
indoctrinate.
Yeah.
This is
Sometimes what
sometimes
they
what they
talk
talk
about
about
in
in
learning
learning
psychology is
psychology
the
is the
growth
growth
mind,
mind,
opening it
opening
up
it up
versus the
versus the
fixed
fixed
mind,
mind,
which
which
just
just
keeps
keeps
going according to the same old
on
ideas,
and
universal truths rather
rather
than
than
exploring.
Is there a concept or any debate as to which type of what process of te ed educating or teaching is better?
Actually, there's
actually
been
there's
quite
been
a bit
quite
of
a bit of
work.
work.
There's
There's
a
a
psychologist by the
psychologist
name
by the
of
name of
Dweck.
Dweck.
She's written
She's
several
written
books
several books
about
about
this,
this.
and
And
she
she
discusses, she calls it the
the
fixed
fixed
mind and
mind
the
and the
growth
growth
mind.
mind.
Those are the
Those
labels she uses. And she recently had a very interesting discussion about it because she was, for many years, she was teaching growth mind is what you really need to do. And then she found out that some of the teachers had become fixed on growth mind. So you can go too far in either way. So she wrote another book to try to, again, rebalance that. So it's not as if there's certain things about a fixed mind. Sometimes you want people to be very fixated, like your surgeon, when you're doing the operation. But the growth mind is the one that is able to ask the questions and to counter the assumed truths. And that's where the creativity, I think, comes in. So I would definitely recommend her work. It's
DWECK is her name. Quick. Carol, that's right.
We have one question on Zoom. Yucha, would you like to say your question?
I don't know if you talked about this already, but have neuroscientists actually, put electrodes in, like if somebody was going to read through a haiku, maybe the first line it'd be more left brain, and then the
I did send a copy. Yes, you have access to her.
Oh.
Sure. No. You have a question.
Yeah. Oh, can I go now?
Where's Yucha?
I'm right here. Oh, you can't.
How come we're not hearing things?
Oh.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Then give me one moment. Can you say something?
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Your question?
Yeah.
Comments?
Sorry, can you hear me? Yes? Yes? Okay. I'm so sorry. So I'm just wondering, like, have neuroscientists actually, literally just put electrodes on, or looking at some brain scans and seeing if, like, certain lines of a haiku are read, that it's activating the left brain or the right brain? I know that's really simplistic, but I guess I'm curious about the neuroscience, the research that was done to confirm this.
As far as I know, there hasn't been any studies done involving haiku, but I think that would be a very interesting study for someone to do to see what's being triggered. I suspect that there would be both the left and the right because there's the use of the language. But that would be very interesting to see what the effect might be in the brain.
So I want to be, one more question. Annie?
Yes, thank you for taking my question.
Annie,
I
go
like
ahead.
to know, because we are not professional one, so usually in the daily life, how can we training or practice our left brain or right brain with a simple series? Like some people say you use your right hand, you were practicing your which brain. You use the left hand, you were practicing your which brain. And I think that the brains, like our exercise, you practice more and then you can bring it up something, helping us to learn or figure it out better.
I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Because once I used to heard some doctor talk about this kind of series a long time ago, but I forgot exactly what they say. If they say if you use the right hand to writing, to brush teeth, and you can practice, I don't know, the left brain or right brain. And then if you use your left hand to practice something, and then you can training your brain, like a right brain or left brain, to figure out something or learn something fast?
I have heard of cases where that they did ask people to change the hand that they're writing with,
Yeah.
to see what sort of results it would have, and that also applies to the drawing technique that was mentioned. The
Oh,
people would who are right-handed would be taught to use their left hand, and have very different kind of an art that they would create. But I think since it is many, many more people are right-handed than left-handed, there seems to be more to it than just left and right brain going on there.
if we use the right hand writing, brush teeth, painting, do everything, it's a training which brain? Training our left brain or right brain?
I don't think it necessarily has an effect which hand you're using. There's also people who are ambidextrous. So that doesn't seem to be, say, hardwired, because everybody's going to use both their left and their right brain.
Yeah, but the result is different. They say if you use the right hand, you are training which brain. That's a little confused because after many years, I heard this lecture, and then today, when you bring it up, I say, how can we help ourselves? If the left brain is for the art, which brain we can training them, or which hand we use, we can training which brain better for us to figure it out, to learning.
I'd have to look more at the studies. I suspect that it's, again, more complicated than, because everybody's going to use both sides.
Oh,
We need
like
both sides.
usually, yeah, sorry. Like usually we use the fork, we use the chopsticks in right hand, right? That's daily
Mhm.
practicing. But the very rare we use the left hand. So if the left hand effective to the right brain or left brain, then we need a chance to let our brain to work on it by the simple practicing, by the hand writing or do something, help our brain to be more sensitive, more active, and helping us in our daily life learn something seriously.
I suspect that this idea of the right and left-handedness might have predated some of these neuroscientific studies that have been done. So it's more complicated than just which hand you use, I think.
Mm, okay.
Mhm. Mm, mm,
Or the right.
mm.
And in class, we paint everything with the non-dominant hand because that's the creative side. We see
Yeah, so it could be left or right,
Yeah,
depending
can I
on the person.
interject? Could I interject a comment as well? I've been doing pottery for about 30 years. This is a real fascinating concept of left or right hands. When you're making pottery, you're using both hands. And although I'm right-handed, and I probably do more with my right hand, they actually make pottery wheels that'll go in the reverse direction. But the point here I'm trying to make is that using both hands, um, I I get to the right brain type of visualization and really experience joy, you know, with with that sort of thing. So I'm just trying to comment that it doesn't have to be left or right necessarily. It can be both in a combination, in a physical combination.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. You're drawing on all of the potential just
Yeah.
to be
one or the other.
Yeah,
Work
and
together.
then the end result is an emotional, it's creativity, it's joyful, it leaves you with contentment and serenity and tranquility.
Mhm.
So come on by to my pottery class anytime. You know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You will.
Yeah, I want to be respectful of our speaker's time since we've already gone over. Thank you, everyone on Zoom. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for the great questions. We can give a round of applause.
Yeah, let us do something.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody on Zoom.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Buddha.
Fascinating
Thank you,
lecture.
everyone.
Very fascinating. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
your questions
So happy to see
and your
all
input.
Miao